You're listening to the Spare No Arrows podcast, a show that equips Christians to stand against our anti-Christian culture. My name's Cody Lawrence, and I'm here to discuss culture, politics, theology, and building Christendom for the glory of God with courage, biblical truth, and sound doctrine.
So ever since my last very level-headed and well-reasoned video on the Crusades, a couple episodes back, just a couple weeks ago, there have been a dozen or so other controversies that have been all over the internet, or at least all over X. And even though I absolutely despise the cesspool that is X, I try to be up to speed on important issues that I think you ought to know about so that you can be informed about the things that I think are valuable to know without having to get caught up in the vortex of X yourself. We had the Crusades controversy, which spiraled into the Winston Churchill controversy, which spiraled into the Hitler controversy, which turned into the Christian nationalism controversy. Pastors are getting caught up in terrible scandals and stepping down. Weird stuff is happening with celebrities. The election is coming up. It's exhausting. All of the controversies, all of the things that we're supposed to have opinions on. It is tiring. And what I'm here to tell you today is that ultimately none of that matters, because other things, whoever you are, matter more. And what are those things that matter more? The things that matter are you, your family, your church, your work, not other people's, but yours. It's okay to keep up with the culture. I try to, and most of the reason that I try to as much as I do is to inform you, and hopefully I do a decent job at explaining, how we ought to be thinking about a lot of big cultural significant events. But we shouldn't ever find ourselves having some explosive opinion about every single little thing that trends on social media. It's a waste of time. I think it's dumb. And so that's what I want to talk about in this episode. Not a particular controversy, but the concept of keeping up with every online controversy and the kind of person that we ought to be versus the kind of person that feels the need to keep up with every online controversy and have certain opinions about those things. So, of course, we need to, it's valuable to keep up to speed on the culture. I think we, in fact, have a responsibility to, which is part of the reason that this podcast exists. I want to expose the issues in our culture, in Christianity, in the church, and not because that's particularly relevant to you and your family, but in a way it is, because if we are aware of the direction of culture, we can know what to resist. We can know what to go against. I can know better the things that my family needs to watch out for if I know the kinds of things that are happening in the culture, or the kinds of things that are happening in other churches, or the kinds of reasons why pastors are getting swept up in scandals and so on. So it's definitely valuable. There is a value to it. Cause and effect exists. We have to react to things in the real world, and we have to live in the world that we're in, and part of that is having knowledge about the world. But not everything we do should be reactive, especially not everything we believe should be reactive, especially not everything we believe should be reactive. In fact, almost nothing that we believe, I think, should be reactive. So ideologically, let's talk about the left and the right for a moment. Ideologically, I believe the left is inherently reactionary. They are reactive. Something happens, someone says something, and they react in a way that prioritizes groupthink. And that group, the collective group of the left in our country, their ideology is their agenda over truth. And the values that broadly dictate the group's agenda is I think some of them, at least, the hatred of responsibility, the destruction of life, property, and freedom. So if there's something good, destroy it or corrupt it. That's what the left is accomplishing in the country right now, and they have been for, at the very least, the past 100 years. We can see this happening in things like abortion, marriage, masculinity and femininity. Those things are all good. Abortion is not good, but life, the life of a child is good. That's good. Let's destroy it. Marriage, destroy it. Masculinity, femininity, the concepts of male and female, let's destroy it. Property, take it all away. We see this in the form of gun laws, abuse of landlords, debt forgiveness, inflation, government handouts, things like that. All things that the left supports. Freedom. Who needs it? We see this in the form of compelled speech, quote unquote hate speech. We saw it in the form of vaccine mandates, cancel culture, and so on. So that's the left. But on the other side is the right. But I think there is a particular group of people that I want to talk about that I've been considering this over the past many weeks, I think, and I've been trying to work out my thoughts. There's another group of people who appear to oppose the left, but exactly like the left, they base all their opinions on groupthink also. And I call these people the reactive pseudo-right, the effeminate pseudo-right, the gay pseudo-right, the idiot pseudo-right. I don't think these people are actually on the right with the reasonable people, where reasonable people should be, where Christians should be. So we could just remove the word right and call this group of people that I'm about to discuss reactive, effeminate, gay idiots. Okay? Because, and here's why, because the right, to be on the right, you need to have the values of the right. And some of the values of the right are things like patriotism, hierarchy, patriarchy, conservatism, life, freedom, property, so on. But if a group of people bases their beliefs on groupthink, then they're not basing their beliefs on values, and so you can't say that their ideology is pushed by the values of the right, even if they appear to line up with those values of the right. So these people appear to be on the right, but they're not actually driven by values of the right. They are at the very least at most co-belligerents. I wouldn't call the people who fit into this category allies. I would call them co-belligerents, because we can fight on the same side on certain battles, but really they don't share the values of the right, because they are driven solely by and primarily by groupthink. Values don't matter. Groupthink matters. And so there was a meme or a text. There was a text that was floating around recently that I thought was very interesting, because somebody who was I would probably consider them one of these effeminate pseudo-right people, shared this. And I just want you to think this over. This was being shared around a lot. And it appears to be from 4chan, which I think is generally a very poor place to get any sort of information whatsoever. But that's where this appears to be from. And here's what it says. It says, people who can't defend themselves physically, women and low T men, referring to low testosterone men, parse information through a consensus filter as a safety mechanism. They literally do not ask, is this true? They ask, will others be okay with me thinking this is true? This makes them very malleable to brute force manufactured consensus. If every screen they look at says the same thing, they will adopt that position because their brain interprets it as everyone in the tribe believing it. Only high T alpha males and a neurotypical type, parentheses, hey autists, are actually free to parse new information with an objective is this true filter. This is why a republic of high-status males is best for decision-making. Democratic, but a democracy only for those who are free to think. So I don't necessarily agree with all of this, but I think it's an interesting thought. And it was obviously shared by somebody who would associate themselves with being on the right. And somebody else who associated themselves with being on the right shared it on social media, and other people like that were sharing it too. And I want us to keep this idea, this concept of low T males and effeminate types parse information through a consensus filter as a safety mechanism. In other words, low T males, according to this, like there's no sources. I just think it was interesting that a person who, or the people, everybody was sharing this as if they were participating in groupthink, and they shared this meme as if this was some profound truth, saying, "Hey, look, people who engage in groupthink, they're low T males. They're not manly. They're not masculine. Truly masculine people can think freely," while everybody shares that. I'm gonna just believe this thing that somebody said on 4chan without sources. You see, that makes me a high T male. Interesting. So here's what I mean. I'm going to describe what I mean by the reactive effeminate pseudo-right. So I'll give some examples. A guy on Tucker Carlson's podcast recently says Hitler wasn't as bad as people make him out to be, which should strike us, and I think reasonably so, as nonsense. But I'll explain. He says that in addition to that, Hitler wasn't as bad as we thought he was, that Winston Churchill is the true villain of World War II. Now, I listened to the podcast, and the guy who said that actually said that he was being hyperbolic a little bit, but he also seemed to take it seriously. He said that Winston Churchill is the primary villain of World War II instead of Hitler, is the thing that he said. Now, a reasonable person, I think, would hear that and think that it's absolute nonsense. But I think that there is some truth in that claim, and that is that Winston Churchill and Hitler were both real people. They're not mythological people. They're real people with real flaws. And so Winston Churchill, even though he was a good guy, and we have to believe that he was a good guy, was not necessarily fun to be around. You wouldn't necessarily want to be his friend. I think Stories of Soul Food did a wonderful episode responding to this Winston Churchill controversy that I recommend you listen to if you want to dive a little bit deeper in this. But the reasonable person hears this, and they say, okay, so Winston Churchill, he's not a mythological figure. Sure, he might have not been too fun to be around. He had some character flaws. But also, he was one of the primary figures who won the war, and thank God for him. Also, we can recognize that Hitler's not a mythological figure. He's not pure evil. He's not the incarnation of Satan. And so we should not believe that he is. But we can also know that he was the primary bad guy in World War II. And he personally led the murder of many, but look, so did Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill killed a lot of innocent people. Sure. Okay, fine. But Hitler was worse. Okay. Hitler conducted putting people into camps and then putting them into boxes and burning them alive and gassing them until they stopped breathing. Okay. So like that is atrocious compared to things that Winston Churchill did. Was Winston Churchill a perfect man? No. Did he commit atrocities? Sure he did. Okay. Whatever. Fine. But the reasonable person, they hear something like that and they say, okay, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The truth is rarely an extreme. The truth is somewhere in between. So the left, they hear Tucker Carlson interview that guy on the podcast. And I think that came out a little bit in the podcast, by the way, that there is nuance, that he wasn't saying like Hitler was a good guy or anything. But the left, they hear that on the podcast and they think, whoa, this guy says Hitler isn't all that bad. So we're going to call him a racist bigot, and we're going to push really hard that Hitler was evil, and so on. But what I'm more interested in is the response to the response. And so these people on the quote-unquote right, a lot of people, they hear this controversy, and they say, whoa, okay, the left believes something. I'm going to believe not the reasonable middle position, but I'm going to believe something that's the opposite of what they believe to the extreme. So if the left believes that Hitler is bad, I'm going to believe that Hitler is good. And that's what a lot of people are actually doing. Like if you go on X, and I don't recommend that you do this because these people are idiots, there was a lot of talk like defending Hitler all of a sudden after this podcast from the people with the red profile pictures and the laser eyes calling themselves Christian nationalists. Now, I've talked about this so much. I'm not afraid of the term Christian nationalist, but it does suck tremendously. The kinds of people who are also in this group associating themselves with this thing that I associate with. It's not making me scared of the term Christian nationalist. I think it is well-reasoned, and I think it is easily true that a Christian ought to not be afraid to call himself a Christian nationalist. However, the people who are also jumping onto the boat like this, who want to defend Hitler, I think is inexcusable. It's awful, it's stupid, and it's groupthink. And that's exactly what we saw happening with this. I'll give you more examples. So the left says that the Crusades are evil. I talked about this in the Crusades episode. The gay pseudo-right, instead of responding with the reasonable opinion and saying like, yeah, okay, maybe the Crusades had some good consequences, but as a Christian, we have to recognize that the Crusades were initiated by the Roman Catholic Church, using authority that they didn't have, and for the reason of these people's salvation by killing Muslims, which is not a good thing. And so we can recognize that there is good and bad within these things. Like, yeah, a lot of them had good consequences, and some of them had very poor consequences. And an intelligent person would be able to see that. But the left, they say Crusades are completely evil. And so there is this particular group of people that respond to that, and they say, okay, well, the left believes something. I'm going to believe exactly the opposite. The Crusades, completely good. You're a heretic if you believe the Crusades were evil. After my Crusades episode, somebody actually called me a heretic in real life. They responded and said, you are a heretic because I did not completely agree with him about the Crusades, because I'm taking a more level-headed and reasonable approach to the Crusades as opposed to the idiots who see the world in black and white. Another example, the left says that Trump is evil. Okay, right? And so what's exactly the opposite of that to the extreme? Because that's what the gay, effeminate pseudo-right believes. Here's what they believe. They say, well, Trump is the best thing since George Washington. Everything he does is good. Blessed be his holy name. That's not where we want to be. I'm going to vote for the guy. Don't get me wrong. But he's not the second coming of Christ. This applies to everything. The left says unlimited immigration. Let's bring as many immigrants in as we possibly can. The stupid right says all immigrants are evil. No immigrants. We have to keep America racially pure. The left says that through taxes and government programs, you should provide for people in need. The stupid right says provide for no one except for myself and my family. I can't provide for anybody outside myself. I can't spend any resources to help any group of people outside of myself. There's another meme that was being shared around recently. This one was actually shared by Elon Musk. And so this is very popular. Maybe you've seen this. But another text from 4chan, it seems. Also without sources, okay? But let's just consider this. Consider the kinds of people that were sharing this. I like Elon Musk, but the people who I'm talking about kind of caught on to this and started sharing it. And so let's consider this. It says, the easiest and quickest way to test someone's intelligence is to make a generalized statement about a group. Say something like Asian men are shorter on average. If they say any variation of not all Asian men are short, or I know a tall Asian guy, you're dealing with someone with genuinely low IQ. They have proven that they aren't intelligent enough to understand abstract ideas like a statistical average or per capita. Why else would they think bringing up an exception like this was some profound statement? They literally cannot understand abstracts. No attempt at rationalizing or explaining yourself will increase your IQ. Also, I think this has grains of truth in it, but similar to the first text that I shared, this actually is damning for many of the very people who were sharing this, for the reasons that I was saying. When the left says something like, Trump evil, the stupid person reacts to that and just believes whatever the opposite is without thinking. They don't understand nuance. They don't understand abstract truths that aren't black and white. They don't have the capacity to do simple algebra in their head to figure out okay, there's some good parts and bad parts, and I think the good outweigh the bad in terms of Trump. Okay, that's what a reasonable person would do. But it doesn't seem like with the effeminate gay pseudo-right that we're actually dealing with a lot of reasonable people. And so they themselves believe this, and they shared this, and so, maybe it's true about themselves too. It's absolutely true about the left in a lot of cases, and a lot of people who claim to be on the right, I don't think they're really on the right, like I said, because they don't share the values of the right. They share the values of groupthink, and the group has no values. When our opinions and our beliefs are controlled by whatever the internet says, what we're doing is we're being teenage girls wanting to have the latest phone and clothes and shoes and the latest cute earrings and trendy scrunchies. Do you want to be like that? If we find ourselves believing the extreme opposite of whatever we see the left saying on the internet, we're still, just like them, we're still letting ourselves be controlled by whatever the internet says. So we can look at the left and we can see they're being controlled by groupthink. They have to believe whatever the group believes. They have to. We should also look at ourselves and ask ourselves, am I believing this just because it's the opposite of what the left believes? Because that's exactly what's happening. There's no reason to take these extreme positions. Now consider this. Almost all of my opinions are considered extreme by the left. And so that's not what I'm talking about extreme positions. I believe many things that would be considered radical or alt-right or extreme, but that's just a label that the left uses to terrorize reasonable people, okay? So when I use the word extreme, I mean actually extreme. I'm saying to believe that, this is hyperbolic, I think not too many people believe the Trump is the second coming of Christ thing, but sure, some people do. Some people is God appoints Trump and he's going to save the country and bring, no, he's just a guy and he's very sinful. And I disagree with a lot of the things that he believes, but I think he is far better than the alternative. So the kinds of people who believe the extreme view that Trump can't do any evil. Everything he does is good. I'm going to change my beliefs to fit whatever Trump says and does. Or I'm going to change my beliefs to fit this idea that the Crusades were good and perfect. And I love the Roman Catholic Church and no, the Roman Catholic Church wasn't heretical and all that stuff. Or the stuff they believe about Hitler wasn't all that bad. That's actually extreme. All that stuff is actually extreme. It's actually ridiculous. Not the kind of extreme that the left calls people like me, but far more extreme than that. My views aren't extreme in reality. The left labels them as extreme. These views are actually extreme in reality, which are not a good thing. We need to control our own opinions. So I have said it's gay and effeminate to be this brand of pseudo-right, even though a lot of them kind of play off as hyper-masculine, right? There's this emphasis on masculinity. But what I see is that this is gay. Like, this is homosexual behavior. But why? Because it's gay to be a constantly reactive person. Because being reactive is being receptive. It's feminine. You're allowing yourself to be dominated. You are weaker than the stimulus around you. You are being controlled. You're being dominated. That's gay. What's ironic is that many of the big, tough, masculine, pseudo-masculine, pseudo-right internet keyboard warriors, exactly like the purple-haired, androgynous Z-Zer-Zim keyboard warriors, they act tough, but they, probably most of them, many of them, they don't own a gun. If they do own a gun, they don't practice with it. They've never been punched. They're not physically fit. They eat trash. And they spend their days getting angry at people on the internet and commenting with their stupid red profile pictures with the laser eyes, playing pretend like a child that they're a modern day crusader. You're acting exactly like how the left acts. That's what they do. They play pretend. They pretend they are people who they're not. They're not tough. They're not masculine. You confront them and they run. They hide behind their computer screens. They're not tough. They're not masculine people. They're fake. They're trans. And a lot of these pseudo-right, pseudo-masculine people, they're trans. They're ideologically trans. They're pretending to be someone that they are fundamentally not. They are effeminate men. And that's pretty gay. That behavior isn't cool. It's not helpful. They are merely the other side of the leftist coin. I hope you come away from this seeing how similar these two types of people are. They are being controlled by what the culture believes, just like the left. They are being manipulated. In fact, I think it's worse because the left is the one who's controlling the narrative. They're the originators of all this. And the people on the pseudo-right, their opinions are being controlled by whatever the left believes because they just believe the opposite. Whatever's popular for the left to believe, they have to believe the extreme opposite. So in other words, they're not just being reactive to things happening in the culture, they're being reactive to these horrible people on the left. They're totally subjugated. They're enslaved. So don't be like that. Grow up. Be free. Be a man. Keep your head down. Do your own work. It doesn't matter what's happening in the four corners of the world every second of every day. It matters what's happening in your own home. It doesn't matter what your favorite podcaster says, even me. Don't get all riled up. I don't think anybody does this, but don't get all riled up every time I have an opinion and say like, yeah, I'm going to believe whatever Cody believes because that's cool. No, think your own thoughts. Be reasonable. Think through the things that you hear. Don't just believe what your favorite podcasters say. That's gay. It matters what is happening with your home, with your family, with your church, with your people. It doesn't matter what's happening with other people. It's good to keep up with that stuff so that you know how to better deal with your own stuff. But don't be consumed like these internet keyboard warriors that are acting just like the fat, purple-haired, androgynous bozos on the left. Don't be like those people. Be focused on the things that are actually valuable. So much focused on the things that are actually valuable in life that whenever one of these internet controversies pop up, that it is less than a blip on your radar. And then you'll be doing pretty good.